Hello and welcome to the Data Delicacies show. We have an amazing guest today, which we'll dive into in a second. What is the show about? We're going to dive into the intersection between data and hospitality and talk about the impacts on the industry. What we do on this show is bring some amazing people together, talk about where technology meets gastronomy, data. We hear a lot about data today. Is that the secret ingredient to success? What other factors are involved? And that's really what we're trying to find out. I'm your host. The show is hosted by Incentivo. I'm guiding us through this. My name is Arun Kumar. I am our Director of Partnerships here. Who's Incentivo? We're the ultimate guest engagement platform for restaurants. And without further ado, I want to introduce a good friend of mine, an awesome person in the industry, a big-time thought leader from the Bay Area, Mr. Alistair Levine. Alistair, thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to come on and chat with you. And, this time we're actually recording it and putting it out for the world to hear.
Exactly. You avoided me in San Fran last week, but I caught you here, which is good. So, Alistair, you and I, we go way back. We've had a lot of really cool conversation. We got to hung on a lot of cool cities together. But what I'd love to dive into is your experience. I mean, you have an awesome experience, and again, I love to talk to people that come from both worlds, right? Someone that lives life of a restaurateur, but also on the tech side as a vendor, and you see kind of a foot in both worlds. So, I'd love for you to share your background and kind of like your history in restaurants and what brought you here today as the founder of KitchenSync.
Yeah, absolutely. My family owns 10 restaurants in the San Francisco Bay Area. My dad started the restaurant group back in 1994 was our first restaurant. So this year will be 30 years. This year will be 30 years. That's crazy to just think about. Hadn't sort of stopped and thought about it until just now. Clearly, we got to figure out what we're going to do to celebrate that. But the first restaurant opened in 1994. So he passed away, unfortunately, about 6 years ago. I inherited the business. In 96, he started a company called Vine Solutions that was a outsourced back office company, initially just to serve his own needs. He was used to having a corporate team in his prior jobs to that on the finance side, and he went to go look for that. And in 1996, there weren't a lot of restaurant-specific solutions on that front. So he started a company called Vine Solutions. We put that company together in 2021 with a company called KitchenSync. And so we've really been operating in the current format for just about 3 years now. Not quite, but pretty close. And the whole focus for us, part of why we put the company together was, we saw that there was more and more technology sort of coming into play for restaurant operators. So how do you grab that data? How do you make it usable? Because data is super awesome, but if you don't do anything with it, it's also the most worthless thing. So, from that perspective, for us, that's where we're focused. So, KitchenSync, basically, we provide a suite of outsourced back office solutions, primarily for independent restaurant groups. What does that mean? Accounting, bookkeeping, payroll, HR. And for us, the whole focus is on a fusion between service and technology, right? There's things that, as I tell clients and my own teams every single day, there's things that technology does really well, and there's things that humans do really well, and both of them do things really poorly as well. And so our general philosophy is you really kind of need that hybrid approach. We're going to put the two pieces together, and ultimately, 1 + 1 = 3, not 1 + 1 = 2. That's really what we're focused on. We currently support about 450 restaurants in 18 states, primarily in the sort of 3 to 20 unit range.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is a lot of clients that come to us they've decided the business is going to be a business and not just a hobby at that point, and they're ready to sort of take the steps necessary to professionalize that business, and they want to grow and scale it and operate it more efficiently. They're also oftentimes having a bunch of challenges around scaling where it's like, oh, all of a sudden now I'm not in every property every day because I've got 3 or 4 units. So that's really the core problem we're trying to solve for a lot of our clients.
Got it. And, as you have these conversations, how much do you feel that some of these operators that are, again, getting to that stage where like this is all new to them, right? They're starting to scale and there's all these different problems that they have. How much do you feel that they are some of them averse to adopting tech because they feel like they may lose control? Are some of them too dependent on tech where they feel like, hey, adopting all this tech is going to solve all our problems? Like, what do those conversations look like?
I think it runs the entire gamut from, terrified of tech to, oh my God, everything, can we automate everything beyond the point of like reasonable expectation? So, I think I hate using the it depends word,
Mm.
but, so much of this is so personalized around, are you a QSR concept? Are you a full service fine dining concept? Are you doing fast casual? Are you a food truck? Do you own multiple food trucks? Is there commissary? Is there not? Right. I think that's what makes this industry really exciting and interesting, but also really challenging, is there's so many variations on a theme from a use case perspective that there isn't, people ask me all the time, like, oh, well, what's the best POS? I'm like, well, it really depends on what you're trying to solve for. What's the best online ordering tool? Like, what are you trying to solve for, right? And I think that's where, because as an industry, and I think this is changing heavily, just when we look at sort of the demographic age group of who owns restaurants at this point, compared to even where we were sort of prior pandemic, that age number, I think, has come down significantly over the last 5 years, especially as a lot of people, older owners, have retired or sold off their businesses, etc. And we're going from that sort of transition of digital nomads, i.e., you didn't grow up with computers and cell phones and all of the other fun and games that we have today, to digital natives, right? And so my expectation, your expectation of how tech is enabled in our life is fundamentally different than what our parents' expectation would be around that as well, and how much we're going to rely on it, and what that sort of core base level is. So I see a huge gamut. I think where most restaurateurs, and I'll speak both for myself and what I see macroly across our client profile, is there's way too many tech solutions. Way too many of them are widgets and not solutions. So tech solutions is probably not even, it's kind of a misnomer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what they're truly looking for is like help solving problems. And they are looking for solutions. And oftentimes there's a classic overpromise, underdeliver in tech. This isn't isolated to restaurants. It's at a more macro level. But really knowing, hey, asking some more questions in discovery, knowing what questions as an operator to ask, and how the stack is going to knit together, becomes a much more complicated problem to solve than I think it seems at face value. And just as an example from my own restaurants, like, we recently selected a new scheduling platform, and it's also our tip pooling solution. And we evaluated 5 or 6 platforms. We thought we'd asked all the right questions, and then I came to find out we're rolling out a new sort of BI dashboarding operations tool that we're working on right now. And I asked the vendor, I was like, hey, do you have a scheduled, like, first of all, they don't have an API export. So I'm like, oh man, I probably should ask that question. Didn't catch that one. They said they had an export, but it was structured. And then I dug in and I was like, hey, do you have this? Like, I need to know what the scheduled labor was versus the actual labor, because it's really important for us as we're managing labor costs, which is something that every restaurant's dealing with and is not going to get better. It's only going to get worse and more complicated. Is a crucial metric, in my opinion, of like, hey, if you're scheduling more than you're budgeted for each week, like the horse is out of the barn before you even start the week, like you may as well, like you're not going to hit your labor number, right? Yeah. Like, so scheduled versus actual is super important. And they're like, oh, we just don't even have an export for that right now. Now they're working to solve that, and it'll be solved hopefully in the next few weeks here. Yeah. But I would like to think I'm a decently savvy tech guy, and I wasn't necessarily fully involved in this process. I let my team kind of run with it. But like, even having a somewhat savvy owner and a team that I think is better than average on that front, we still ended up like kind of stepping in this bear trap here. And I think this, if we weren't savvy and I didn't have the right people to ping and get this problem solved, I probably just am never using the solution fully. It's not going to solve my core problem. Now I've got a dusty thing on my shelf, technology shelf, that's just going to cost me money. So I think a lot of operators are battling that on a daily basis. you almost need like the rocket money for your restaurant. You're like, hey, what subscriptions do I have? Like, am I
Yeah.
really using any of these? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah.
No, I mean, that's a great point, right? I mean, I know, again, there's to your point, there's a ton of tech out there, and and I know you're vocal about this stuff, and we've had some conversations about this too. But like, how much do you feel of it is also on the vendor side, right? By not, are vendors doing the right justice in terms of like explaining exactly what we can do to appeal to the hospitality lens, right? I mean, you always talk about restaurants and hospitality, and as vendors, we're serving the hospitality industry, but do you feel that vendors are serving it the right way with the right things in mind, or is it just, or sometimes vendors
I
is it
hate to
more of a
go
means
back
to
to
an end?
it depends again, but some
Yeah,
vendors are really successful at it, and other vendors are much less successful at it.
yeah,
And some of those much less successful vendors also are in like dominant positions in a particular vertical or in a particular solution. And so there may not be a lot of other viable options, and you're kind of like, well, okay, this is the hand I'm dealt with, right?
mm,
And I think it really depends on like how core is the problem that vendor is trying to solve. How much does it need to interact with the rest of the stack? And ultimately, what's the outcome that I, as the operator, I'm going to deem as success, right? And so, yeah, I think vendors could certainly do a lot better here. The problem is, of course, if you're a VC-backed company, this doesn't show up super sexily on a spreadsheet, right? Like this
yeah,
doesn't on the model. It doesn't like, oh man, hey, like we spent a ton of money on like onboarding and client success. I think in this industry with CAC so high, allocating some of the client acquisition costs to that would be super helpful. But yeah, I mean, look, I think in general, the other big opportunity, in my opinion, that's almost bigger than like the operators themselves doing this is a lot more vendor to vendor discussions, right? Like, how are
mm,
you trying to, just have your vendors connect directly? Like, if you're evaluating a new vendor, like, there's no reason you can't ask them to connect with other people of your existing tech stack,
right,
or all jump on a call and like really talk through the problems. Like, I mean, for years I've been advocating. I was actually talking to the Mertech people, which is coming up next, in the next little bit here. But, I was talking to them. I was like, hey, I'd love to see an operator and then like three of their key tech stack pieces on a panel and go through the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, not all of these, not all implementations, not all stand-ups go like smooth. In
right,
fact, most of them don't. Like, there's always surprises. There's always things that have to be figured out. There's always like, hey, this POS with this scheduling tool works way better than this POS with this scheduling. Like, all of those things, there's not a great way to figure out what that is without pure trial and error. But most of the vendors know which of the integrations work great and which of them don't work so great, right? And it's tough because like on the sales side, you're like, oh, I definitely want to sell this thing as a sales
yeah,
guy,
yeah, yeah,
but from a vendor standpoint, like you're better off, if the solution isn't going to be successful, it's probably just not a great outcome. It's
yeah,
it's a bit like, hey, this person has a gluten allergy, but we'll serve them bread anyways and hope it goes okay, right? Like, it's probably
yeah,
not going to work out great for you.
yeah. Um, you brought up a few great points in some of your LinkedIn posts about costs increasing across the board, right? Labor costs and supply chain and ingredient costs. Just overall, new legislation coming into place where things are just becoming more expensive. With that trend going up, do you see any other trends that are going to fall into place based on that over the course of the year or the course or the few next years? And in maybe in response to that, what type of tech or what can tech do to help make operators' lives easier from that perspective when costs are rising over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing tech can do is just provide visibility into that, right? What's going up? How much is it going up? Should you change menu prices? Should you change vendors? Should you change portion size, etc. Right? I think the other big things are the tighter the menu is, the more concentrated it is in terms of like Hillstone Group does an exceptional job with this, right? They've got their ribeye steaks, and then they have that same meat being used in the French dips. It's just really
Right.
smart, simple menu engineering. It seems basic. I mean, the classic quote that I just use over and over again is restaurants are simple and simple is hard. But a lot of these things are just very simple things, but you got to just do them every day, iterative, iterative, iterative. it's not for everybody, right? Like I would personally get a little bored like that detailed every single
Right.
day. I like to be a little more strategic. But yeah, I think fundamental trends, labor cost is not going to go down. I do think that like really menu engineering your menu out is going to become increasingly critical, not
Mm.
just from a food cost perspective or total cost of goods perspective, because the same is true for your cocktail list, your wines by the glass, if you're doing NA Bev, etc. But also really looking at like how much labor are you spending to put that dish on the plate, and what do those subcomponents look like? I was going through this with a client recently. They had a menu item, and I was like, "Hey, I didn't even notice that I didn't even know you sold this."
Mm.
Until I went on your website and just happened to see it pop up. And then we dug in with the PMix, and they were selling less than two items a day of this menu item. And then as we dug further in, they're like, oh, well, and we're making a unique sauce just for this one item. And we're
Mm.
doing this and we're doing that. We're like,
Mm.
you're like, okay, maybe it doesn't make sense to continue to have
Right.
this item. So I think there's going to need to be a lot more thoughtful pieces around that. Tech can certainly massively. I mean, I was able to quickly pull that PMix and quickly look at the recipe cost associated with that and what the menu cost was utilizing a couple pieces of the tech stack that we use heavily across the kitchen sink clients. And so I was able to get that information. We were on a Zoom call 15 minutes in, like bam, 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 bam. I don't think most operators are able to do that today,
Mm.
unfortunately. So I
Mm.
think that alone is super helpful. So awareness for me is number one, always, because then you can kind of attack the problems from there. The
Right.
second thing is how do you then, once you have that awareness, how do you optimize, right? So how can you utilize tech to optimize? That includes, prep lists, production, ordering. I think there's going to be a lot more stuff geared around COGS categories and labor categories just because they're the most impacted by inflation and increases, et cetera. Like, rents are definitely up, but like you're not renegotiating your rent. So,
Right. Right.
to me, it's going to be heavily focused on those two categories and how do you optimize that process and how do you in general, one of the things tech does really well, or computers do really well, is they're pretty good at taking very disparate data together and making like a well reasoned, highly probable forecast out of that, which allows you to back into a lot of those other things. So I think we're going to see huge strides, machine learning driven forecasting for restaurants. There's a bunch of companies working on it already today, but I think we're going to continue to see massive strides there, which is going to have a lot of downstream effects into COGS and labor.
Right. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other big one is going to be on the sales and marketing side, vis-a-vis online ordering, vis-a-vis other marketing, loyalty. Loyalty 3.0 is a concept that the thanks guys talk about all the time that I really appreciate, which is no longer just the punch card driven loyalty, which was
Right.
how it's been done for 20 years. And how do you really create a better guest experience vis-a-vis loyalty and really that personalization piece? We've obviously seen that rampant across other brands, especially in the luxury goods sector.
Yeah.
Hey, unique experiences, invite only,
Yeah. Yeah.
all sorts of stuff like that. I think a lot of that's going to come to our space. Obviously, dynamic pricing's been a super hot topic lately
Yeah.
as well. But the average online order, I saw a stat this week, 20% larger than an in-person order.
Mm.
I certainly see that across our customer portfolio. There's the lack of sort of shame when you sort of supersize it, if you will, when
Yeah.
you're like, oh, I want the large thing or the extra protein or the this, that, or the other thing. That's borne out across, the investor disclosures from everybody from McDonald's to Chipotle to everybody else, who's a much larger scale and has to do those investor disclosures. But so I think there's a huge opportunity there from that check size. I think also dynamic pricing is coming, whether everybody wants to pretend it
Yeah.
didn't exist historically or did. It's existed for years, but I think the sophistication with which restaurants, both at scale and smaller, are going to be rolling out, utilizing that concept to actually provide better guest experience and more profitable outcomes for them. I think
Yeah.
we'll see a lot more of that as well. So those would be the main trends for me. all of it starts with awareness. Where do you need to focus? How do you solve?
Right.
It's impossible to solve a problem if you don't know the problem exists.
Yeah, and you brought up a lot of really cool points, and I'd love to dive deep into a couple of them.
Yep.
First, I just want to make a point on the. I think the dynamic pricing thing, it just got a bad moniker because I mean Uber surge pricing, everyone thought it's going to be the same, right? So you see all the memes now where someone's like short the baconator at 12 p.m. and get their fries, like just some hilarious stuff. But it's funny because you look at brands like Amazon. They've been doing dynamic pricing for a very long time, right? If you go to and the certain sites like
restaurants have as well. I mean, happy hour is another form of dynamic pricing, early bird specials, late night specials, all you can drink weekend brunch. It's like that's a dynamic form of dynamic pricing. Like it's only available at a limited time for special
flights,
price.
right? I know they say like Tuesday mornings or whatever is the best time to book, and a lot of these like Google flights and Flight Hopper, they're all the same thing. And I think more than anything, it's like people will see more of a dip in stuff they buy as opposed to people think there's going to be a crazy spike. But it really depends.
I also don't think it's going to be a crazy spike either, right? Your $3.50 tacos might go to $4, which from a percentage price change is big. But I don't think we're going to go from that like $11 Uber ride to the $140 Uber ride when you're trying to take on New Year's Eve, right? Like that's that's not the intent here. I think the other big thing that might potentially come out of this, because we've already seen this on Uber and DoorDash pricing, where they're adjusting those prices dynamically from a delivery standpoint. But I think what we'll see off potentially is some sort of surcharge for peak pricing, especially for off-prem. So, if you're taking care of your guests on-prem and you're, let's just say you're a ramen shop, right? And so you've got some in-store dining, some off-prem, third party, not third party, whatever that is. We'll set that whole discussion aside for right now. At a 7 p.m. peak period, or truthfully, that's moved to 6:30 now, but at 6:30 peak period now, normally what would happen is your manager would oftentimes just go and turn off DoorDash, Uber Eats, because it's like, oh, we just can't handle it at all. And then of course somebody will forget to turn it back on because that's always what happens. But then secondarily from that, for me, just having that dynamically managed, I think because I do think we're going to move to a unified order management solution. Right now we kind of have POS and online ordering and they're sort of separate but connected. To me, it's like, why would you not just have all your orders managed in a single place? The industry hasn't wanted to dip its toes there. Certainly retail and everybody else is already there on that front. But once you're there, it's like, hey, if I know that order is less profitable, can I throw a surcharge on it where it's like, hey, you want that bowl of ramen in the next 20 minutes? Great. It's going to be an extra $10, rush charge type deal. Or, if you want it 45 minutes from now, it's not, right? And then you kind of let the consumer opt in on their front end. Look, maybe they won't place that order at all and you're going to lose the sale. It could happen, but it's not. But, if you're losing a sale that you're not going to make very much money on in favor of a sale you're going to make more money on because that delivery channel is significantly more profitable or the fulfillment channel is, then did you really lose an order? Like you did, but like I'm not sure that you actually, because your profitability piece is so critical. So I think we're going to see more stuff like that where it's like, hey, like if the consumer wants to opt in, reservations are getting sold regularly at top places. You can go pay these services that use open table sniping algorithms and all this other silly stuff. At some point, the restaurants should figure out, like, hey, if there's that much demand that people are willing to pay on the secondary market, the restaurant's getting no benefit of that. If anything, it's making it worse for their loyal guests. Now, all of a sudden, you're layering in loyalty. They've got that special reservation line. They can bypass that surge pricing, if you will, but that surcharge piece. And then, new guests can still have the opportunity to try it out. They might just have, a fee, or maybe they come in, 5 on a Tuesday, no fee, but Friday at 6:30 p.m. it does have a fee, right? I think we're going to see more stuff like that. And again, 80 to 90% of the restaurants may not ever be able to implement something like that because they just don't have enough demand, piece. But for those highest demand restaurants, they're going to have an opportunity to further monetize that sort of demand cycle for themselves.
You brought a lot of great points there. And what I want to get to next is you brought up loyalty a couple of times, right? And I know we've had some good conversation about this. And before I dive into the conversation, I want to ask, like, what does loyalty mean to you?
I mean, to me, loyalty is a way, ideally, of recognizing my most loyal guests. So that could be defined by a couple different ways. I generally would prefer, ideally, if we're talking ideal world, some sort of weighted algorithm scoring score, because I think visits, dollars, and it's some combination of like number of visits, dollar spend, and length of time that you've been spending, right? Because would I define a loyal client as somebody who comes in every single week and, buys a beer and a side of fries? Yeah, they're still a really loyal client.
Mhm.
Are they maybe necessarily a client that's as loyal or as valuable as, somebody who comes in once a week and drops $500 on dinner? I don't know. Maybe
Mhm.
not, right? It depends somewhat on my concept again. But, I'd like to at least know who both of those people are and be able to recognize them each in their own unique way. Because if I send the guy an offer who comes in for a beer and some fries every 3 times a week and has been doing so for 20 years, you know, for a big steak, maybe he'll redeem it, maybe he won't, but like
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
recognizing what my brand and value proposition is to him as the consumer. I'm not customizing, I'm not curating it. To me, I argue without doing that, you're sort of removing the spirit of hospitality from this. Because
Mm.
hospitality is all about meeting people where they are and giving them what they need. Half the time, they don't even necessarily know they need it today, right? Like that could be, hey, you can sit at the bar, read your book, and we'll just keep filling up your glass of wine. Sometimes that's the day you're having, or to an incredibly memorable birthday party for 24 of your closest friends, whatever those things may be, right? So to me, that's sort of how I look at loyalty is,
Mm.
how do I track that? How do I customize that? Do they have preferences? Is there things they always like? Do they have allergies? Like, how do we start thinking about customizing the experience for them so that they feel recognized, honored, and they want to come back? I mean, we've all had those experiences in
Yeah.
restaurants where you're like, oh my God, like the service was just incredible, or the manager. And half the time the experience isn't even one that started positive. It's like something got messed up. The manager came to your table. They did such a great job recovering you, and
Yeah.
you're like, now this is your favorite restaurant because you went from like, you're just like, hey, we all make mistakes. This got screwed up, and you fixed it. But knowing those types of things, having a
Right.
single place, it's almost in some ways the CRM for restaurants, but which
Yeah.
is so hard for restaurants because like so many of the transactions historically have been non-capturable transactions. And so loyalty gives us a way to capture those transactions.
Yeah.
But really what to me the core end goal is, how do we better serve our guests? How do we understand them better? How do we better serve them? All around driving repeat business frequency, and which ultimately is great for me as the business. But this is very much should be a win-win between the customer and the restaurant. I think a lot of people don't necessarily look at it in that way, but that's sort of how I would fundamentally look at it.
Yeah, yeah, no, and agree. I mean, I look back at some of my favorite restaurant experience. So places I go back frequently, in my city here, it's somewhere where they know me by name, or they're like, hey, we got this table for you, or like, hey, we know this is your drink, like, or hey, like last time you tried this, you should probably try this because we made something special, whatever that is, right? Like, I think that for me has always gone back. And sometimes to your point, like the food is usually good, but sometimes even the hospitality component of it, of having that personal interaction with someone, because sometimes it may not be the best meal I've ever had in the world, but it's good. But that hospitality portion, I think I had a good conversation with one of our clients about this. Is it's almost that emotional component, right? Like that personalization has that emotional attachment, and then you remember that piece of it, and you're like, I want to relive that, and that's what makes you want to go back.
100%. And I think to tag on to that, one of my most underrated things I think that we think about as restaurateurs is nostalgia. How much of like what informs what places you crave, what foods you crave, etc. are like, my mom cooked this, or my grandma cooked this, or my dad did this, or
Yeah.
this. We used to go to a restaurant every year on my birthday, and this was the place I always picked. I mean, I think like Benihana doesn't have nearly the same number of locations as they do now as they used to. but like, how many kids like every year was like, nope, that's where I want to go on my birthday. And like
Yeah.
now as adults are like, no, I want to go back there. I like, like because it's like that fond memory. And I think that's an underrated quotient, but it's pegged very squarely to that sort of emotional draw of the restaurant experience. I think obviously the more you go up in cost, the more the client expectation, guest expectation is that there is more customization, that there's more of a tailored experience in much the same way as it is in retail, right? If you walk into a
Yeah.
Target, you're not necessarily expecting them to be like, oh, like
Yes.
here's your personalized suggestions. Now online you're expecting that, but in store, you're obviously not expecting that, versus if you walk into a Hermes or a Louis Vuitton and you've been
Yeah.
buying stuff there regularly, you'd sort of expect the sales associate to be like, "Oh, lovely to see you again, Mr. Smith. Like,
Right.
last time you bought your wife a brand new purse, here's the latest things we have that are similar to that, or what can I help you out with today, etc." So I think restaurants are sort of in the same way. The strategy for QSR loyalty might be a little bit more transactional and might be a little more though I think there's always fun ways to do it still. Like, I think as restaurateurs we forget how much like the behind the scenes portion of what we do is actually way more interesting to the general public than we think. Like, hey, come taste the new menu. We're rolling out new menu items, right? Like, I think
Yes.
you look
Right.
at like Erewhon has murdered it in the grocery space and like prepared food space with this, where they have all these celebrity backed, uh, smoothies. And now it's this like huge badge of honor on the celebrity side of like, oh my God, I got my Erewhon smoothie done. And they're partnering with the celebs charity of choice. And it's just this like win, 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 win all the way around. I think we're going to see more of that kind of stuff
Yeah.
coming to restaurants where, hey, like you're a regular guest, like what would be great? What would you like to see on the menu? Like, we ultimately our job's to like nurture and fulfill these people, like,
Yeah.
so
And it's interesting you mentioned that because for on the retail side, like I'm a big fan of the clothing brand Kith. And Kith just launched a loyalty program where they took all your previous transaction history and then put you in a tier. And then based on that tier, there was specific clothing only for loyalty members based on the tier that you're at. So there's shoes, clothes, which I love that kind of stuff, right? I mean,
yeah.
me, I'm a big sneaker guy. So that for me, I was like, wow, this is dope. And I think about that. And it's interesting because you brought up some examples of fine dining, right? I mean, typically when we think of like someone remember your name or your cocktail, it's usually at a fine dining place. But what we've seen is loyalty programs, we don't see them too much on the fine dining, like kind of white tablecloth space. It's more kind of the QSR fast casual. So I'm curious to get your thoughts on like, where does that start to blend then into, I mean, obviously you want to provide a perfect selling experience. A lot of that happens online today, but then when do you start to maybe see fine dining go down that route? And they do it to an
I
extent.
think it's already happening. I mean, you have like,
Yeah.
you have a ton of people playing in that space. Like Seven Rooms is like doing the restaurant
Got
CRM.
it.
I think there's multiple players in the space that are sort of starting to figure out how that is. Again, I think it goes to loyalty 3.0, right? Where it doesn't work that well fine dining wise to have a punch card to be like, well, every time you ordered the tasting menu, you get the punch card, and after you have 10 tasting menus, you get one free, right? Like no
Yeah.
one's
Yeah.
coming 10 times for the like grand tasting.
Yeah.
I mean, very few people, right? Like not no one, but very few, right? So I think it's again, it's we rolled out loyalty last year across our restaurant group, and yeah, we've got a couple steakhouses at $100 check average. We've got some brasseries at $50 check average, and some other stuff sort of in between. And I think for us, we haven't cracked the code. I'll just say like it's not like, oh man, we've got it all figured out. This is
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what you do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we've been trialing like, hey, like you're one of the top tier members. Like let's invite you to the next restaurant opening, right? Hey, like you're inviting 300 people. What's an extra 20 people to come? And like those guests are going to be huge vocal advocates for you. Hey, invite them to the next, quarterly menu change, seasonal menu change, right? at the
Yes.
most basic level, hey, how about some free corkage when you bring in your favorite wine? Or how about you, whatever it may be, right? And so we're by no means like nailed the code here, but I think that, we're fully in that fine dining segment. We're actively like looking to figure out what does this look like? How do we better serve the needs here and sort of craft a program that like people are gonna have a ton of joy in interacting with, right? And I
Yeah.
think to your point, like things like drops and exclusivity. I know someone else who's running a limited menu, and the menu
Mm.
only they have menu items on their menu that only people who opt in and pay to be in their loyalty program get access to. And oftentimes it's like variations on like core menu items, but you are not allowed to order those items
Yeah.
unless you're
Yeah.
sort of part of that, right? So
Yeah.
everybody likes to feel special and unique. So like whenever there's those unique sort of things that you can reward like those guests who are really loyal and doing, supporting your business heavily, I think that's always a great thing. I think there's a ton we can learn from, Kith, Supreme,
Yeah.
like, streetwear's really
Like
got
that.
this sort of stuff down on that front. There you go, right? So, um, but across the spectrum, right? Again, I'm always looking. I think too much in our industry, we spend too much time sort of looking through the blinders of just our own industry, and like a lot of these problems other industries have dealt with and solved, and or have great ideas for how we can address. And so, I think
Yeah.
that's sort of where I would land.
Yeah, yeah. Like even, you look at, I mean, airplanes, right? We all have, I mean, we travel a ton. We all have our airplane loyalty, and you get access to a lounge because of that. And it's like maybe restaurants have a special part of the restaurant that's like, hey, loyalty members only, right? Or merch. I know merch is becoming such a big thing. I mean, just in general, but even within restaurants, like, hey, we have special merch. It's a special drop or like whatever that looks like.
Yeah, I
And
mean the Carbone boys now have their own clothing line. I mean Mario has his own like whole separate clothing line that he's started now, and he's got like the ice cream shops inside Kith that they're doing, and like I think we're gonna see a lot more collaboration type stuff because I think
yeah,
there's a lot of overlap between restaurants and fashion and music
yes,
and like all of these various things. They're all creative professions. I mean, at the core, like it's funny we don't really talk about restaurants as a creative profession, but it's got as much in common with interior design and architecture and any of these
yeah,
other sort of like artist as a profession things, which also are why a ton of operators are maybe not the best on the business side, because for a ton of those creative professions they're also
yeah,
terrible business people because that's
yeah,
just not how their brain works, which is again totally fine. But I think we're going to see more of these like mashup. I mean, look, we've McDonald's has been incredibly successful doing this with the specialty meals of Travis Scott and
yeah,
BTS and all of these other like large scale performer groups. You've seen alcohol, between Casamigos or Proper 12 or any of these other like massive brands, with celebrity endorsement and sort of the overlap of like celebrity as a marketing tool and thus as
yeah,
like, or you look at like a David Chang solution on the media side where he's basically not really opening restaurants anymore and has become more of a media company with a consumer packaged goods add-on. But the restaurants are sort of those flagship, like
right,
like
right.
Halo brands for them. So it's like, oh, this is what gives me authority to speak on these other things. I mean, it's a fascinating time to watch the industry evolve.
Yeah, yeah, and to go back to the Travis Scott example, I mean the whole reseller market's crazy. I remember someone had like packed like it was fries from his Happy Meal that they were reselling, but it was like air wrapped and it was going for like hundreds of bucks. But it's just insane. To your point, like something as simple as that, you stamp a celebrity's name on it. Obviously, someone Travis Scott is pretty popular right now with a lot of his collabs, and all of a sudden it's like people are like, yeah, like I want to buy it, right? Versus like just regular fries, but it's like a special box or whatever that looks like.
Well, and I think really it's all about brand alignment, right? Like
Yeah,
all of these things are great, and obviously, like your average like random 3 unit restaurant group is not going to be doing a Travis Scott collab anytime
yeah,
soon.
yeah,
I mean, maybe I guess depends on who you know, but like unlikely to be the case, right? Because the economics just wouldn't make sense. But I think you see that both with sort of influencers, etc. But fundamentally, it's about finding the right fit for your brand, right? And I think, does it make sense to do X, Y, or Z? I don't know, maybe, right? Like again, like what's gonna be in alignment with your brand? I mean,
Yeah.
if Travis Scott came out and started, saying that Mastro's was like, and then he did a special Mastro's meal, I'm not sure that that necessarily moves the needle in the same way that like it does for McDonald's, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
versus, if it was like, John Mayer or somebody came out and was like, "Oh yeah, we're gonna do like a special like Grateful Dead meal at some interesting spot," like that might be a different
Mhm.
animal. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Timing is a big part of it. And so, just to continue on this topic, I mean, a lot of what we see is to create those recommendation personalization models. It's a lot around machine learning. And I know you brought this up earlier in one of your points. I'd love to just kind of get onto this topic of your general thoughts on machine learning and AI, right? Because I think we've seen it as a buzzword across multiple industries, especially within restaurant tech. Even just walking through an array in FS Tech and some of these shows, it's like almost every other booth says they have something to do with AI and ML. And just want to get your general thoughts there. And then how much of it do you see as like, we've seen it go from in certain industries, even my personal life using ChatGPT, but like go from a fad to like a real thing. Love to get your gauge on where that sits currently in industry and where it's going to grow over the next little bit.
yeah, I mean, look, I basically think I think it's definitely gonna kill off some jobs. Like we'll just start there, right? It's coming. It's not going anywhere. Where I think it's most powerful is digitizing institutional knowledge. So somebody who's worked the floor for 40 years, they know when inherently when to cut a bartender and send them home because there's just not going to be any more business that day. And
Right.
they know that here, but they don't, there's no way to like the 23-year-old manager that's the shift manager on a Tuesday night, like
Yeah.
they don't know that, right? And so I think that's a huge opportunity is to use tech as that sort of I refer to them as like bumpers. So like I want my team to be able to drive down the road. I just don't want them to be able to drive off the road
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
still ultimately want them to like learn and get better, but I just would like to do it within sort of a little bit of controlled environment and not craziness, right? So I think
Like those
that's one
rails you put
huge
up at a
use
bowling
case.
alley to like stop a
Yeah,
train.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
guardrails on the road, whatever,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of how I think of some of that implementation. Um, in general, my philosophy is there will be people are going to work with AI, right? It is going to be a force multiplier that's going to serve you the right information at the right time in the right way you need it, right? And so I think there's huge opportunity within the space for that. I think the challenge in our space is data models. There's just not a lot of publicly available data models, and there's not a lot of large scale, well groomed data sources. And so it's going to be slower to come to restaurants simply because those data models and that well groomed data just doesn't exist. I mean, even a POS company as big as say Toast, how the chart of accounts is set up, how the revenue centers are set up, how menu categories are set up, could differ in one group from every single location they
Mhm.
have. And right. And so you think about, okay, well, how do you then structure that data, ingest that data, and then thus allow that data to be actionable data and drive real insights? It's going to be a major challenge for the industry to figure out how to navigate. I think it's going to be super exciting because we're going to start really having data standards all of a sudden, which is not something that's existed historically, and which going back way earlier into our conversation around vendors working with each other, if there's data
Yeah.
standards, now there's a data standard, and this is how you're going to move data around and structure it and tag it. And um, I think we're probably a decent ways off there. I think there's obviously a lot of buzzwording right now because it's what investors are dumping money into. And so if you're a restaurant tech company and you know you're raising money right now, you're gonna be like, well, yeah, we're doing machine learning and AI, even if you're not, right?
Right.
And
Right. Right.
it's pretty easy to sort of throw the buzzwords around. Again, I think it's all going to go back to humans. This is a human-driven industry, it's going to be about enablement and empowerment of the human decision makers. How do you make them more efficient? How do you make them more knowledgeable? How do you make them a better version of themselves? And empower them to make better decisions. I talk a lot about making good decisions on bad data.
Yeah.
Obviously,
Yeah.
like that's an area where AI machine learning, assuming those endpoints and that data sourcing is good, can help people make good decisions on good data, because they'll have a better understanding of like, oh crap, we didn't pull any of the catering sales for last week, and flag that, right?
Mm.
Versus, for most people's systems right now, it'd be like, oh, yep, sales look good. And you're like, well, no, actually, you're missing like 30% of your sales or whatever that might be.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that goes back to your point originally about awareness and just education about like what do you even know what you're looking for, right? And are you blindly trusting the data that you see, or do you have the intuition to potentially dive a level deeper and understand, okay, well, no, this is still some stuff missing here.
Well, and what's the solvable problem, right? What problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
How is that data going to help you better solve that problem, right? And I think that's ultimately where I would always sort of start and end the conversation and make sure that like whatever you do along the way, that at the end of the day, you're like, this is what I'm using this data to solve this problem for, right? Is it cost of goods data? I am solving to run a bit more efficient restaurant, which is ultimately more profitable, and I need my cost of goods to sit in this window. How am I getting there? Is there waste? Is there, whatever you're going to work the problem, right? But at the core, what are you trying to solve for, right?
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of times it's like, oh, just data, 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 and you can have too much data. It's
Yeah.
the amount of information we have in our little, handheld computer that I can access the internet with. It's like you could go Google how do you run a restaurant? You'd probably find 25,000 YouTube videos. Do you
Yeah.
know which one's the right one? No.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, like the data's there, and some of them are going to be right and be able to give you great answers on those questions. A ton of them are going to just be some dude pontificating about whatever with no basis on it, right? And that's true for anything, but I think that's where AI machine learning is. It's going to be interesting to see how it's able to help drive,
Mhm.
you know narrow that information on that front.
Yeah. I mean, you shared a lot of amazing points, and I feel like, as usual, we could chat for hours.
Of course.
But we are coming up on time here, so I do want to wrap up with a quick lightning round. So I want to ask you a few quick fire questions. First thing that comes to mind, we'll go with it. So to start, what is your current favorite cocktail of choice?
I'm a Boulevardier or Negroni guy. That's where I
Wow.
kind of net out.
Okay. Where have you had most recently the best Negroni? Like, where's the best Negroni in the country?
That's a good question. I love this place. It's pretty close to my house. It's called Gun Club.
Okay.
It's got big dead animal heads on the wall, and they do a Negroni on tap. That's absolutely lovely. You have it while you wait for the place next door that does pizza that doesn't take reservations. So oftentimes for me, that's like, of course, the answer is like some sort of thing. Like I like the vibe around it as well. So
Okay.
that's probably the most recent one that sticks out in my mind. But I've had so many.
Yeah, yeah, no, and I know that there's different variations on it too. So that I just curious as to like the most famous one, because I mean, again, you know me, I'm a big espresso martini guy, and there's like so many different types you can have, and there's a ton of places I could.
Hilariously, that place I just mentioned is the best espresso martini I've ever had as well.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, I
They
know where
do
I'll
do
be
like
next time I come
fresh
by.
nutmeg over the top. It's like
Ooh, okay.
it's really nice. So
Now you're talking my language. I love
yeah,
it. Brunch party or dinner party?
dinner.
Why?
I'm just not a big brunch guy. I don't love spending
Okay.
$28 for eggs that are $3 food cost. The last thing I kind of want to do, like for me, I don't want to like wait for brunch. Like in the morning, it's like the last thing I want to do is like go stand around on a sidewalk somewhere at like
Yeah,
and
yeah.
bake alive and wait 2 hours to like eat mediocre eggs. It's just not like I know others have really strong opinions about this the other way. But I like that I can make a dinner reservation, so I know I don't have to wait and I can just like go and have dinner. If I knew what time I was going to wake up routinely on weekends for brunch, then like maybe that solves the
Fair,
problem. But
fair, fair. Yeah.
that's never how most people exist at brunch. They're like, oh well, kind of whenever we wake up, and then we'll roll in, and you're like, from a restaurateur standpoint, brunch all the way. It's way more profitable. But for me
Yeah.
personally, it's dinner.
I love the way you think about it because you gave us like all lenses. What's a home cooked meal you're famous for?
Uh, Probably either like pork chops or like pan roasted salmon.
Oh,
I cook a
okay.
lot at home, so like I could go a really long time on this, which sounds really arrogant, but like those would be
Oh, no, no,
probably
no.
like those two we have fairly regularly. My wife regularly requests that like we're having those in the rotation.
Love it. Final question here. You'd already shouted out one, but is there a specific restaurant you would love to shout out in your city that's like your favorite restaurant and maybe an item there and the chef if you know them?
Yeah, that's a good that's such a hard question for me, hilariously. I really like the focaccia at Molto Amici in Healdsburg. It's this like
Okay.
incredibly, it's like almost like a laminated dough focaccia. It's like super tall. They slice it on the side, and then it's like rip and dip with this incredible like butter, like herb, like compound butter thing you wipe through it, which is like not the most elegant way of eating, but is like really quite delicious. Particularly enjoying that right now. Super excited, of course, for like all the spring stuff. So I'm
Yeah.
sure it'll change next week. But yeah, for right now, that's probably what I'd shout out.
Love it. Well, Alistair, thank you, man. You brought a lot of really cool insights. I mean, to recap, you talked about kind of like your general thoughts on where the industry is going to go, your thoughts on loyalty, machine learning, and some of the key takeaways are the awareness piece for operators, and two, how the personal portion of hospitality is so important in all of this, right? There's so much tech out there, but the personal component is really what bridges that gap to make every experience what it is. So thank you so much for sharing. For the folks listening, Alistair, where can people contact you if they want to, have a conversation, learn more about KitchenSync, or learn where to get some awesome Negronis?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you could reach out to me at Alistair Alistair at kitchensync.us or go to kitchensync.us and reach out there. The restaurant group is Vine Hospitality around the Bay Area. You can also reach me through there. It's funny, you end up with like 20 email addresses as you like grow companies. And so
Yeah.
the amount of different emails I check on a regular basis is too high. But yeah, always happy to chat with fellow industry experts. So
Awesome. And definitely give Alistair a follow on LinkedIn. He shares a lot of really cool thought leadership on things that are going on. And almost every week I feel like you're or once or twice a
yeah,
week.
I'm trying to the guy at Cali Barbecue Media, whose name
Yeah.
I'm like horribly blanking on right
Sean,
now.
yep. Big shout out Sean Wall Chef.
Sean,
Yep.
yeah, Sean. God, I can't believe I couldn't remember his name. But he was like, "Hey, him and I were having a conversation much like this one. And he was like, you should really be probably posting these conversations on LinkedIn." So I'm trying to post 5 days a week, Monday through Friday.
Love it. Love it.
Usually Fridays is accounting 101. So if you're wanting to learn more about accounting 101 and the basics of restaurant accounting, Fridays is the day. But it's usually just general musings at this point. So.
Love it. Love it. And yeah, big shout out to Sean Wall Chef. This show wouldn't be possible without him. So amazing person. And he always says, be the show, not the commercial, which that'll always stick with me. So
100%. Couldn't agree
that
more.
wraps up another amazing episode of Data Delicacies. Again, I'm your host, Arun Kumar. And again, if you're interested in joining the show, reach out to me directly on LinkedIn, or you can email me at arun@incentivio.com. I will be at most of the upcoming trade shows, so you can always find me there walking the floor. I'll probably be wearing some crazy colored shoes as always. And again, if you want to learn more about Incentivio, go to incentivio.com. Reach out to us. We're happy to chat more. And of course, we'll be coming with many more amazing episodes, talking with amazing people like my good friend here, Alistair. Alistair, thank you again so much for joining. Really appreciate your time.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Until next time.